There are some who say that Israel made its announcement about building 3,000 new housing units in occupied Palestinian territory last Friday in order to escape the predictable international censure, given that Israeli government offices close early on a Friday. Well, if that were the hope, no such luck. There's been a choreographed display of outrage from Washington and from European capitals. This was the French President, François Hollande.
Aussi bien sur la Palestine, Israël, où nous sommes préoccupés.
On Palestine and Israel, we are concerned about the decisions that were announced and we hope will not be carried out to build 3,000 houses in areas that weren't expected to accommodate such buildings and which would call into question the fundamental position of the international community, that of the two-state solution.
Well, Einat Wilf is a member of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, from the centrist Independence Party. Danny Dayan is the chairman of the Yesha Council, which is an umbrella group of settler organisations in the West Bank. I first asked Einat Wilf whether the international criticism does have any effect on Israeli government policy.
What deeply saddens me is that it might have exactly the opposite intended effect, because the sense is, for many Israelis, many of them, like myself, who actually oppose the settlement project, is that the criticism is deeply unfair. It makes two major mistakes. The first is that it judges the Israeli government by what they say rather than by what they do. And the other thing is that it seems to take a very narrow view of the root causes of the conflict.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You say that you take issue with the international community judging Israel by what it says rather than what it does. Well, if an announcement has been made by the Israeli government, isn't it reasonable for governments to judge them by what they've announced they plan to do?
In this case, no.
Why not?
Because history has shown that these are declarations. I can assure you not a tool shed would be built in this area.
You're talking about the area E1, which is this highly controversial area to the east of Jerusalem.
Yes, and in general, it has been shown again and again. The Israeli government ultimately has shown a very careful policy in settlement building, which was really intended for security purposes close to the border. And Israelis feel when the world looks at the conflict, they judge Israel unfairly and they refuse to look at the root cause of the conflict, which is the continued denial of the Arab world and the Palestinians, that the Jewish people have an equal and legitimate right to their own homeland. And that means that you cannot teach children whose parents and grandparents who were born in Gaza and the West Bank that they are from Israel. They are not.
Danny Dayan, as far as you're concerned, when you hear this, I guess, in a way predictable chorus of international criticism, do you at all have a pause for thought, or do you think actually it's good that Israel is going its own way?
Well, I'll surprise you maybe, Tom, because, you are talking from London, and I just landed 2 hours ago from Washington. And in Washington, the perspective is completely different. It seems to be that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton talking from the podium, referring very lightly to the issue. I heard
very lightly. She's been deeply critical.
Well, she did say some criticism about it, but it was quite, in the margins of her speech about the commitment of the United States to Israel. Why it's so important if a few hundreds or even a few thousand housing units are built in Judea and Samaria in what you called, may I say erroneously, the West Bank.
Well, it's what the rest of the world calls the West Bank.
Yes, the rest of the world can make an historical and geographical mistake too, but this is not really the issue. I don't want to go into semantics.
No, but forgive me, actually, in a way, it goes to the kernel of the point, which is that Israel sees this in one particular way, the rest of the world sees it in another particular way. Indeed, the White House has said that they see these particular actions as counterproductive, make it harder to resume direct negotiations. Are you saying that at no point Israel thinks to itself, well, hang on, if the rest of the world is united against us doing this, then they're just wrong?
Look, the fact fact that the Palestinians are putting a precondition and not coming to the negotiating table without any preconditions to maintain direct talks with the Israeli government, this is the core issue. The other things are symptoms of that erroneous moral and political decision by the Palestinians.
Einat Wilf, if I can bring it back to you, I mean, you say in a way quite similarly to Danny Dayan, although perhaps you're coming from different political perspectives, that essentially the international community has got it wrong. Even if you believe that, when you have pretty much the rest of the world stacked up saying, really, what you are doing is counterproductive and inflammatory, does it not make you stop and think and consider that perhaps the approach is wrong?
Is this counterproductive? Yes. Is it helpful? No. The world, again, is not treating the conflict in its entirety and is really not willing to get its hands dirty into what makes this conflict so difficult to resolve.
That was Einat Wilf from the Knesset, and I was also speaking to Danny Dayan, the chairman of the Esher Council.